وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. I hope you are all keeping well. I want to ensure that my voice is coming clearly. If any of you could just type in the attendee chat, then inshallah we can begin. Okay, inshallah khair. Thank you. Let us start. Welcome to the second session, inshallah, to do with the life of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. Again, just as a beginning note, I would welcome any comments or questions during the course of this hour before us. Feel free to type in the attendee chat if there's anything you would like to say. Let us begin then, inshallah. A quick recap of what we discussed last week and what we are planning to discuss this week. Last week we talked about the common understanding that people have of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam as being a champion of knowledge. Somebody who the Muslim world was overwhelmed by his knowledge, and there's an echo that is not very clear. Okay, let me try to mute the mic and start and turn it on again. 1 second. Okay, I'm hoping it's going to work now. Is my voice, if it's very bad, then I can try to do something, otherwise we may just have to continue like this. Okay, so I was saying that the last week we were talking about the role of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and how in the common understanding we have of him, he was a champion of knowledge. He was somebody whose knowledge was spread throughout the Muslim world, and he got a chance that his predecessors, like previous Imams and the Imams after him, did not have. That was the opportunity to freely teach. And we talked about how, although all of that is correct, it's lacking in one very fundamental aspect. And that is that it portrays Imam Sadiq alayhi salam as being somebody who was indifferent to the social political problems that the Muslim world was afflicted with at that time. Are we to say that the Imam did not care, God forbid, or even he did not do anything? Even if he cared, did he not do anything to try to help the Muslim world and get rid of these oppressive rulers that we will kind of give an ishara? We'll talk a little bit today about how bad they were, and inshallah we want to refute this kind of understanding. Last week we also spoke about what the overall philosophy of Imamah is. What is the purpose of an Imam? If the Imam is to continue the path of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, then the Prophet's goal was twofold. On the one hand, it was an educational goal of teaching Islam to people, but also there was a goal of reforming society and establishing an Islamic system, an Islamic government. And so as the successor to the Prophet, those same two goals would have to be continued by the Imam. And then we looked at the lives of Imam Sajjad and Imam Baqir alayhim as-salam, and we saw indeed that although a lot of their efforts were spent in training people, there were very strong stances that they took at times. Too much buffering. Okay, I'm not too sure what to do. I'm on a VPN here, maybe that's why. Let me try to disconnect and come back, inshallah. I'm gonna just exit and come back in, switch my internet. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I hope my voice is better now, the quality is better. Inshallah, I'll start talking. Okay, I'll start talking, and if it's very bad again, please let me know. So I was saying that last week I discussed what we talked about last week. Now this week, inshallah, we want to look at the specific life of Imam salam. Again, we will remind ourselves what the overall goal that all of the Imams had was, and then we will look at the specific situation that Imam Sadiq alayhi salam was faced with, and then we'll try to go into some specific activities that he did to address the social political situation that he had before him. Okay, is my voice coming clearly, I hope? Okay, regardless, inshallah, if it's very bad, just send me a message. So, as we explained last week, the overall goal that the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam had was, at least we can say, one of the goals. Okay, if not the main goal, we can say one of the very important goals the Imams had and they were pursuing and acting upon was trying to establish an Islamic society. And we talked last week about the importance of the leaders in an Islamic society. When the leaders are not appropriate leaders, are not good leaders, are not role models for the society, then that has a trickle down negative effect. And so I don't want to repeat myself things that we talked about last week. The short story is this, that one of the goals that the Imams were trying to pursue was to remove these dictators, was to remove the Banu Umayyah, the Banu al-Abbas, and establish a true Islamic government where they themselves were the head of that government. That was their haqq, that was their right that they deserved. That was what was expected from them to lead the Muslim society. When that right of theirs to lead was taken away, it wasn't like they could just give up. It wasn't like a right. You know, there's sometimes when you have a right that you can forfeit your right. No, this wasn't one of those rights. This was a right that them not fulfilling, not them not having that right, them not being the head of the Islamic society was a huge blow to all the Muslims, was a huge detriment to all of the Muslims. So they had that responsibility to bring about an Islamic government. However, as we talked about last week, and we will also again see this week, one of the main things that they had to do, especially during the time of the latter Imams after Karbala, one of the main things they had to do was prepare the groundwork for this kind of an Islamic society. You see, the experience that had been seen before during the time of Imam Ali alayhi salam and Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam, that clearly indicated that an Islamic government cannot sustain itself unless there are people who are willing to sacrifice. Why was it that Imam Hassan alayhi salam could not continue his government and was forced to abdicate the throne, was forced to sign a peace treaty with Muawiyah? Clearly, as he says himself, it was because he did not have supporters who were willing to help him. There was so much hypocrisy and betrayal amongst his own army. So that is a lesson for Muslims, that if there is going to be a government that has the Imam at the head of it, it's going to be difficult. It's going to require sacrifice. It's going to require people who have been trained by the Imam to a very high level of taqwa, that they can withstand the difficulties and help the Imam when times get tough. And so I just wanted to start off today's session by again reminding ourselves this key point that I was trying to talk about last. The Shia community, it was seen in those centuries, in those early years, it was seen as a political group. The Shia were somebody who had that political ambition of getting rid of Muawiyah, getting rid of Yazid, getting rid of Harun al-Rashid, or whoever else it was that was the Taghut in power. And the Shia's ambition was always to put the Imam on the throne. One of the very clear ways that we can see this Shia agenda or the Shia goal is in poetry that is very representative of people's ideas and of different ideologies in those days. You see, poetry was like the media of that time. You know how today we have different newspapers that are following a certain ideology. We have like a right-wing newspaper, or we have a left-wing newspaper. One newspaper that is supporting the liberal government, and one newspaper that is supporting the conservative government, right? Back in those days, poetry was the media. You had some poets who were supporting the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, outstanding poets like Farazdaq, Humayt, Sayyid al-Hamyari, Bi'abal, these eminent companions who the Imams supported and valued their efforts so much. They were Shi'ah poets whose poetry was there to support the Shia ideology and the Shia movement. Whereas on the other hand, you had poetry that was in support of the Caliph of the time, poetry that was in support of the Banu al-Abbas, lots of poetry. And so we see in some of this poetry, we can see very clearly that these Shia poets are presenting and showing the Imams as being the true leader of society. This poem that I have written here before you on the slide is a poem of Humayt al-Asadi, this eminent companion of the 5th and 6th Imam, who was eventually martyred for writing such poetry. He says about the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam that they are sasatun la kaman yara ra'iyat al-nas sawa'an wa ra'iyat al-an'ami. He says the Ahlul Bayt are leaders, political leaders of society, but they are not like those leaders that consider leading people and leading animals to be the same. They are not like Abdul Malik and Walid and Sulaiman and Hisham. He's by name, he's bringing the Banu Umayyah and saying that these are leaders who treat people as if they are sheep, as if they are cattle. But the Ahlul Bayt are not like that. Or in another poem from another poet, not one of these ones whose names I put, but somebody who lived at that time, the time of the Imams, he is attacking the Banu al-Abbas. You know, the Banu al-Abbas, they claimed to have the right to the caliphate because of their relationship to Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet. So this Shia poet, in response to them, he says, لِلْبِنْتِ نصف كامل من ماله والعم متروك بغير سهام. He says that the daughter is the one who always inherits from her father. The uncle does not inherit. You know that in the fiqh of Islam, if there is an heir from the first tier would be the parents or the children, then nothing goes to the uncle. So I just wanted to start off by reminding ourselves that this is the kind of light we're looking at the Ahlul Bayt in, that the Ahlul Bayt in those centuries were seen as political figures, and their Shia, their community, were those who had that political goal of putting them in power. I would like to ask if, again, my voice is coming clearly, or is it very bad quality? If somebody could please type on the attendee chat, is the voice coming clearly? Okay, it's fine. So the other interesting point that I wanted to make about the time of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam is that the time of Imam al-Sadiq was also unique in that the common understanding that the Shia had was that the Shia movement would become victorious very soon. As I had mentioned last week, Imam al-Sajjad and Imam al-Baqir alayhim salam, they were laying the groundwork for a Shia movement, an uprising to get rid of the Banu Umayyah and put the Imam in power. They were laying the groundwork, they were preparing things, they were spreading that important Shia knowledge, the ma'rifat of who the Imam really is. They were weakening the ideological foundation of the Banu Umayyah. And at the same time, a lot of other things were happening in the Muslim world that clearly showed the Banu Umayyah were getting weaker day by day. There were external wars at the borders of the Muslim Ummah. There were internal uprisings. Many of the oppressed Muslims in different parts of the Muslim world started revolts against the Banu Umayyah. There was widespread poverty. There was extreme injustice on behalf of the Banu Umayyah. I'll just give you a Hisham, the Banu Umayyad caliph, who was the same Hisham who poisoned Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, it's narrated that he was so lavish and amassed so much wealth that his wife had an attire of clothing, a piece of clothing that was woven from gold, and it had so many expensive jewels on it that it was so heavy that she couldn't even wear it. Or again about Hisham, it is narrated that he had a carpet that was 100 cubits by 50 cubits. Cubit was like a measure that they would use at that time, less than 1 meter. Basically, he had such a big carpet, again, that had been sewn from gold and silk. So there was extreme wealth on one side and extreme poverty amongst the masses. It's so much injustice. I'm sure you've heard of Hajjaj bin Yusuf and the kind of oppression that was carried out to the Shi'ah. Because of this, there was such a common disgust and antagonism towards the Banu Umayyah that people were somehow ready to accept the Shia madhab. And the idea of the Imam who is resisting the Banu Umayyah, who is the true ruler, who should be the one in power, was welcomed by the Muslims. Many Muslims would have accepted that. And they realized basically that the true people who were capable to oppose the Banu Umayyah, the Muslims, many of them realized that the true person who is capable to fight the Banu Umayyah, who is a threat to actually overthrow the Banu Umayyah and become the leader, is the Imam Baqir or Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. As a result, we can see that amongst the Shia there was this kind of conception and idea that Imam Sadiq will be the one who will be the Qa'im. Qa'im was a term that was common amongst the Shia. They were waiting for the Qa'im, meaning the one who would rise up, who would overthrow injustice, and who would establish the rule of justice and tawheed and adalat on the earth. Let me give you a few stories. Not only do we see this kind of understanding amongst the companions, but we see certain ahadith where the Imams also said such statements as well. Now, of course, we need to understand these kind of statements appropriately. Not that the Imams said something that was incorrect. What maybe we can say is that the Imams were talking at times based on the apparent and overt circumstances. So let me just narrate a few of these different stories to you. In one of the ahadith, the fifth Imam alayhi salam was asked about who is the Qa'im. And he hit his hand on his son, Imam Sadiq, and he said, "This is the Qa'im." You see, he was telling people that the uprising, the Shia Qiyam will be very soon. Qa'im, definitely here, Qa'im means the one who will rise up. That it was like a term that was understood in that way. The one who will rise up and establish justice, overthrow the oppressive leaders. In another hadith from Imam Baqir, again, alayhi salam, he says, it is said, the narration says this, that Imam Baqir looked at his son, Imam al-Sadiq, alayhi salam, and he said to his companion that, look at this man, look at Hada, this person, referring to his son, Imam Sadiq. He said, this is the one about whom, he is one of those about whom Allah Azza wa Jal has said in the Quran, وَنُرِيدُ أَن نَمُنَّ عَلَى الَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَنَجْعَلَهُمْ أَئِمَّةً وَنَجْعَلَهُمُ الْوَارِثِينَ. This is to do with the story of Nabi Musa in the Quran. That in the beginning of Surah Al-Qasas, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala says that Allah has this will of favoring those people who are oppressed on the earth and making them to be those who will be in charge, making them to be those who will inherit the leadership of the world, basically. Another two stories to do with one of the very eminent and close companions of Imam al-Sadiq called Zurara. Okay, in one of these stories, Zurara is talking to the Imam. He's talking to Imam Sadiq and he's asking the Imam that when will this Amr happen? Is the Amr close? Remember I told you guys last week, for those who were there, that the Amr was a word in the ahadith that referred to the establishment of the Shi'ah government, overthrowing the enemy. And so Zurara is asking Imam Sadiq, when will this Amr happen? And Imam says, it will happen. He doesn't say when. And then Zurara asks him, will it happen in a year? And Imam says, Insha'Allah, it will happen. Then Zurara again asks him that will it happen in 2 years? And again, the Imam says, Insha'Allah, it will happen. And Zurara's understanding from this, as is mentioned in the narration, is that he was sure it will happen within 2 years. In another narration, these are all narrated in these two narrations about Zurara are narrated in a very important book of Rijal called Rijal al-Kashi. It's one of our primary sources in Ilm al-Rijal. Anyways, in another story about Zurara, one of the other companions, he asks Zurara, basically, Zurara tells this other companion, Hisham is his name. Okay, Zurara tells Hisham that you will not see anybody sitting on this wood, as in the wood of the mimbar of caliphate. You will not see anybody sitting on this mimbar other than Ja'far. Then when Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam died, that companion Hisham, he went back to Zurara and he said, do you not remember what you said? You said that he was going to be the one who will sit on the mimbar, as in he will be the one who will become the caliph and overthrow the Banu Umayyah. What happened? He died now. It didn't happen like you said. And then Zurara agreed and he said, that was my own opinion, that I thought that it was going to happen basically, but it didn't happen. So what I want to show you by these stories is that the Shia community was eagerly anticipating a revolution. They were waiting for the day Imam Sadiq would launch an uprising, overthrow the Banu Umayyah, and establish an Alawi government. The same way Imam Ali alayhi salam was the caliph, they were waiting for Imam Sadiq alayhi salam to become the caliph. However, there's a fundamental difference between the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam and other people who were lusting for power. The Ahlul Bayt were not just simply lusting for power. Ahlul Bayt wanted power to establish the rule of Allah, and the only way they would go to achieve that power was in an Islamic manner, in a way that Allah would have been happy with, in a way that Islam has sanctioned. And as a result of that fundamental difference between the Ahlul Bayt alayhimussalam and other people, for example, the Banu al-Abbas, as a result of that fundamental difference, the Banu al-Abbas were able to resort to things that the Ahlul Bayt would never resort to. The same way that Muawiyah, during the time of Imam al-Hassan, he was willing to resort to immoral things that Imam al-Hassan would never have done. Imam al-Hassan explicitly in some of his ahadith, he said, alayhi salam, that if I wanted power, I could have outsmarted Muawiyah. Basically what he meant is I could have bribed people, I could have done haram things to get into power. But because I followed the Islamic way, overtly in the apparent sense of the matter, I lost. Of course, that's not a loss in the eyes of Allah, but the truth of the matter was that Imam al-Hassan had to abdicate the throne. He didn't get that opportunity to continue in power, right? Same thing over here, where because the Banu al-Abbas were willing to trick people and oppress people, deceive people, they were able to come in and take advantage of that groundwork that the Imams had laid. The Imams knew that if they wanted to do things properly, it needed time, it needed training, it needed people who they would slowly prepare so that they could establish a true Islamic government. And while they were in the process of getting things ready, all of a sudden the Banu al-Abbas came, they took advantage of it, and they usurped the power for themselves. Okay, this is the last thing I want to talk about before we'll go into some specific examples of Imam al-Sadiq's activities. So despite the fact that the Banu al-Abbas did eventually come in and take over the power, so it was a setback for the Ahlul Bayt. The Shia movement that had been working to put the Imam in power, all of a sudden, everything changed. And instead of them getting into power, the Banu al-Abbas came in power. Despite this setback, before it happened, that is in the time of the Banu Umayyah, and even afterwards, the Shia movement continued. The Ahlul Bayt were always busy working towards that political goal that they had of establishing a true Islamic government. Inshallah, that's why we want to look at some specific examples of what Imam Sadiq was doing. But one last thing I want to say before we go into that is this, that some of these political activities of the Imam, we cannot expect to be able to see it very clearly in the books of history or in the ahadith. Why? Why is it that we don't see that, oh, the Imam was doing this undercover activity, he was planning an attack, he was planning to take over in this way? Part of the reason, of course, is that history is often written by those who win. So many of the books of history to do with those early centuries of Islam were not written by the Shi'ah. They were written by the Ahl Sunnah. They were written by historians who were working for the government. You know, the Banu al-Abbas were in power from the time of Imam Sadiq, about the year 130 Hijrah, up until the year 650 something, I think, when the Mongols sacked Baghdad under the Mongol Hulagu, one of the grandson, I think, of Genghis Khan. That was during the time of one of our great scholars called Khwaja Nasiruddin Tusi. So for 500 years, the Banu al-Abbas were in power. The Banu al-Abbas see the Shi'ah, see the Ahlul Bayt as being a threat, an enemy. Do you think they're going to write history in favor of the Shi'ah? Are these secrets of what the Imam's doing, are they going to be represented in the books of history that are written during the period of the Banu al-Abbas? Of course not. Those people who win, they will disclose that, oh, by the way, before we won politically, when we had these undercover activities, this is what we were doing, this is what we were doing. But those people who do not win, those secrets might never come out. They'll be buried in history. Another thing, of course, is that the fundamental nature of undercover political activity is that it's undercover. It's not going to be announced to everybody that the Imam was doing this, the Imam was doing that to get rid of the Banu Umayyah, the Banu al-Abbas. Despite that, we can see clear evidence that there was this kind of a political struggle that was going on. All the details are not there for sure, but enough is there to be sure, to be 100% certain that the Imams had political activities. A lot of this we talked about last week, but inshallah today we want to get some more examples of the life of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Again, I just want to ask, is my voice coming clearly? Is there no comments or questions? If somebody can just type that it's coming clearly. Okay, it's clear. Okay, so the 3 or 4 things that we want to talk about that Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam was doing. First and second, we want to talk about his educational activities. First of all, teaching and clarifying and spreading the concept of Imamah. And second of all, his teaching of Ahkaam. That same thing that he is famous for, that we all know him for, how there was a very serious and very dangerous political dimension to that. Inshallah, we want to disclose that and talk about that. The other thing that's even more interesting is that there was undoubtedly an organized network that the Shi'ah had. Throughout the Muslim world, Imam had close contacts that he would be in touch with, that would be carrying out activities on his behalf, smuggling money, spreading knowledge. This is something we can definitely see in the lives of other Imams, and even we can get a feel for it in the life of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. The last point, which is also very interesting, I probably won't get into it. In one of the previous classes I did for the academy a couple of years ago, we had talked about this, and that was there were military uprisings of members of the Ahlul Bayt. Zayd bin Ali, for example, the uncle of Imam Sadiq, or some of the descendants of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, or Yahya, the son of the same Zayd that we're talking about. All of these people, they had military uprisings, either during the life of Imam Sadiq or the life of Imam Kadhim or some of the latter Imams. And definitely in some cases, the Imams were supporting them. The Imams were praising them so much, crying over them when they were killed. We see this idea that they were not doing something against the Imam. It wasn't like the common image that often we're given is that, oh, these were extremists. the Imam didn't agree with that kind of a military activity, and that's why the Imam himself didn't do it. These were just extremists who, without the permission of the Imam, they started an uprising. No, that's not the case in some cases. In other cases, maybe it is, because there was a lot of such uh, Imam Zades, we call them, a lot of descendants of the Imams who started military uprisings, but definitely some of them were great individuals. Anyways, that's another aspect of Imam Sadiq's political activities that we won't get into today. But let's start with the first one of teaching the concept of Imamah. Okay, so basically from the time that the Holy Prophet ﷺ passed away, one of the main efforts and activities of the Shi'ah community, including the Imams ﷺ, has been to explain this concept and to prove this concept of Imamah to all the other Muslims. We see this very clearly in many ahadith of all of the Imams, including Imam Sadiq, that he was reminding people that don't forget that Ali was the Imam, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam was the Imam, Imam al-Hassan was the Imam, Imam al-Hussein was the Imam. In some cases they might have even explicitly said, I am the Imam today. Okay, I'll bring a few of these ahadith that we can look at. But before I bring these ahadith, we have to keep in mind that what does the word Imam mean? Today when a Shia thinks about the word Imam, he thinks of a spiritual leader, an ideological leader. Definitely that was not the only meaning at that time. Definitely the word Imam, it included, if not, we may even be able to say its primary meaning, but if not primary meaning, let's just be safe and say part of the meaning of the word Imam was a social political leader. The Imam was the leader of the Ummah, the leader of the society. So when Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is coming forward and telling people that, oh people, Ali ibn Abi Talib was the Imam, I am the Imam, what does that mean? That is a very political statement where he is saying that that Banu Umayyah Caliph who is sitting on the throne is not the leader. He's not supposed to be the leader. I'm the one who's supposed to be the leader. It was a very dangerous political statement that he was making when he said such things. So the idea that the Imams have this kind of political role, the word Imam has this political and social meaning to it, even that can be seen in ahadith. In one of the hadith of Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, it's a very lengthy hadith where he talks about who the Imam is. He's explaining to the Shia that who is the Imam. I'll just read some lines from this hadith. He says that the position of Imamah is the same position of prophethood. Hiya manzilatul anbiya. It is the inheritance of the awsiya. The Imam is the Khalifa of Allah, the Khalifa of the Holy Prophet. Then a bit later in the same hadith, he says that Imamah is the foundation of Islam, and it is its branches as well. It is through Imamah. Later on he says that the Imam is the one who makes the halal of Allah to be halal. He is the one who makes the haram to be haram. He is the one who establishes the laws of Allah. He is the one who defends the religion of Allah. He is the one who calls to the path of Allah, and so on and so forth. Clearly, like if we ponder upon such a hadith, it has a very political meaning to it, that we're saying the Imam is the one who should be in charge of the Ummah. He should be the one who is establishing the law in the world, in the Muslim country. In another hadith, we have that Imam al-Sadiq on the day of Arafah, on the plains of Arafah at the time of Hajj, when everybody, all the Muslims have gathered over there, Imam al-Sadiq is calling out. He is going to one side and calling out, and then he's going to another side, to the left, to the right. He is shouting something to all the Muslims who are there. Imagine the situation, imagine the scene. What a strange scene. The Imam, all these Muslims have come from all over the world, and the Imam has some important message that he wants to tell all of them. What is he saying? وَهُوَ يُنَادِي بِأَعْلَى صَوْتِهِ. With the loudest of his voice, he's announcing, أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ إِنَّ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ كَانَ الْإِمَامِ ثم كان علي بن أبي طالب عليه السلام ثم الحسن ثم الحسين ثم علي بن الحسين ثم محمد بن علي ثم ها. And then he doesn't say his own name. Apparently, ha means like, fulan, somebody else is the imam after them. Well, it's clear for people who hear that he's talking about himself. So the imam, at this time of Hajj, when Muslims from all over the world are there, he's calling out and telling people, oh people, know that after the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ali ibn Abi Talib was the imam. Then Hassan was the imam. Then Hussein was the imam. Then Ali ibn Hussein was the imam. Then Muhammad ibn Ali was the imam. See, this is a very strong political statement. That's what I want to show it in that light. It's not just a simple belief. It's a political situation statement that he's making. Another very interesting story. I have a few hadith, but let me skip it in the interest of time. I have one that's extremely interesting. There's a Shi'ah. We don't have the name of this Shi'ah in the hadith. It's narrated in Bihar al-Anwar of Allama Majlisi. We don't have the name, but apparently there was a Shi'ah a man who went from Kufa to Khurasan. And when he went to Khurasan, he started to call people towards the wilayah of Ja'far ibn Muhammad. Imagine, we have this Shi'ah who's on a mission. He's going to another city, another land, and he's trying to recruit more people to become Shi'ah. He's recruiting more people to join in the fold of the wilayah of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. And the story goes on, it's got an interesting ending. Just quickly say it, that from these people of Khurasan, some of them accepted and became Shi'ah, some of them rejected the man, and some of them, they said, we're going to do ihtiyat, we're not sure. We're not going to accept, but we're not going to reject either. And then from these three groups, every group sent a representative to Medina to go and meet Imam Sadiq. So one representative from the people of Khurasan who became Shi'ah, one representative from those who rejected, and one representative from those who did ihtiyat and they didn't accept nor did they reject. When these three representatives came before Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, the one who was from the group that had done ihtiyat, they hadn't become Shia nor had they rejected Shi'ism, he was speaking to Imam Sadiq. On his way to Medina, he had committed a filthy act, which is narrated in the hadith. And so when he's talking to Imam Sadiq asks him, okay, which group are you from? He says, oh, I'm from the group that's doing ihtiyat. And then the Imam reprimands him. He said, where was your ihtiyat that night when on the way to Medina you did that filthy act? And the man is shocked. Anyways, that's aside from the story. The main point of the story was this, that look how there was a man who was going to Khurasan and he was calling people towards Imamah. You can see that the Shia were propagating the idea of Imamah, and as I'm trying to show, it had this very political dimension to it. That was the first thing I wanted to talk about. The second thing is explaining Ahkaam. This is the aspect of Imam al-Sadiq's life that we are all very familiar with, the one that we all know him for. We know that our fiqh is called fiqh Ja'fari. Our fiqh is so much influenced and formed by the ahadith of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam that rightfully so it is called the fiqh of Ja'far. We have all heard stories about that huge hawza that he would run in Medina where thousands of people from all over the Muslim world would come and study at his feet. They would study all kinds of sciences and they would debate the non-Shi'ah and they would overcome the non-Shi'ah in their debates. All that is true. That is all an aspect of Imam al-Sadiq's life. But did we ever bother to think that this same ahkam has a very strong political dimension to it? Why? Because by explaining the Shia ahkam, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam was essentially rejecting those other kinds of ahkam that were at the service, those other kinds of Islam, let me say, those other interpretations of Islam that were at the service of the oppressive caliph. You see, one of the things that happened after the death of the Holy Prophet ﷺ was that when these oppressive leaders came into power, especially from Muawiyah onwards, okay, when these oppressive leaders such as Muawiyah, such as Abdul Malik bin Marwan, when they were in charge of the Muslim Ummah, they were faced with a problem. On the one hand, they were claiming to be the Khalifa of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi. They were claiming to have this Islamic post in the Muslim Ummah. On the other hand, they didn't have any Islamic knowledge themselves. They were ignorant people. They were not scholars of Islam. So what they did is they had their own scholars that were working for them. Muawiyah took people such as Abu Huraira and Ka'ab al-Ahbar, people who had no previous position or eminence or were not known as eminent scholars in the Muslim world, and he made them into scholars because they were willing to do whatever he said. So they became an expert authority on Islam who would narrate hadith. And of course, these people fabricated. So on the one hand, the Caliph was somehow saved, his reputation was saved because he had knowledgeable scholars who would be able to explain Islamic matters on behalf of the government. And then maybe more importantly, they would be able to fabricate things to legitimize the rule of this oppressive caliph. Anyways, that's a lengthy discussion. We don't need to go into examples, but again, in some of the previous classes I had the opportunity to teach for the academy, we gave detailed examples of such scholars like Ka'ab al-Ahbar and some of his fabrications. But anyways, with the time, as time went on, the role of the scholar was no longer just to narrate hadith. From the corpus of ahadith, these sciences such as the science of fiqh developed, and it became an independent science. We had muftis, we had people who would give fatwa, we had mujtahids, who would derive their own ruling from the Islamic sources. And again, even at that stage, you had the ulama-ya darbari, we would say in Farsi, the ulama who were just working for the court of the caliph. They would explain Islam, they would explain the Quran, they would explain the Ahkaam in a way that suited the caliph. They would tell people that to rise up and fight against an oppressive is not Islamic. You should never do that. You should always just give in to injustice. Let me narrate one such story for you. One of these stooges of the caliph, one of these people who was not a humble scholar, humble before the Ahlul Bayt, rather somebody who was claiming to be his own source of knowledge as opposed to the Ahlul Bayt, alayhimus salam, was a famous figure by the name of Hassan al-Basri. Okay? He was young during the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, alayhi salam, and he lived for a very long time after that. It is narrated that during the time of Hajjaj, that bloodthirsty, oppressive governor of the city of Kufa under the caliphate of Abdul Malik, it is narrated that there were some people, somebody in particular called Ibn al-Ash'ath. This is the grandson of that famous Ash'ath, that famous Khariji who was involved in the killing of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Anyways, the grandson of Ash'ath, who is known as Ibn al-Ash'ath, he started a revolt against Hajjaj. And so because of this revolt, some people, they came to Hassan al-Basri and they asked him that, "Oh Hassan al-Basri, what do you think? Should we rise up and fight against Hajjaj or not?" This is narrated in a Sunni book of hadith. Okay? And Hassan al-Basri, he told them, أَرَى أَنْ لَا تُقَاتِلُوهُ فَإِنَّهَا إِن تَكُنْ عُقُوبَةً مِّنَ اللَّهِ فَمَا أَنْتُمْ بِرَادِّ عُقُوبَةِ اللَّهِ بِأَسْيَافِكُمْ. Hassan al-Basri said that, no, I don't think you should rise up and fight against Hajjaj. Because Hajjaj's rule is a punishment from Allah. And you with your swords, you will not be able to oppose and revert and change the punishment of Allah. It is a bala, and Allah says in the Quran, Allah has said, فَاصْبِرُوا حَتَّى يَحْكُمَ اللَّهُ وَهُوَ خَيْرُ الْحَاكِمِينَ. Allah has said that when you have bala, you should just sit down and have patience. Look at this. What a ridiculous understanding of the Quran. What a ridiculous interpretation of Islam. That you just give in to oppression. You just sit down and have patience and let these oppressors come and do whatever they want to you. This was an example of how these scholars would interpret the Quran. They would interpret Islam in a way that was helpful and good for the caliph. So in such a context, when Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam comes forward and He explains Islam in the true way, not a way that is helping the government of the Caliph. No, he explains the true Islam, of course, that is going to be a threat, that is going to be taken as a dangerous political action that he is doing. And as a result of that, we see that there is pressure that was later on Imam Sadiq. For a while, the Banu Umayyah were so busy in their time of their decline, and the Banu Abbas, in the beginning, they couldn't put pressure on Imam Sadiq. But eventually, when their government was solidified, a lot of pressure was again put on Imam Sadiq, and he was not even able to teach simple things. In one of the narrations we have that it became so bad, there was so much pressure that people should not be able to even talk to Imam Sadiq, that the Shia community had questions about nikah and talaq. They had ahkaam questions and they didn't know the answer to it, and they couldn't go talk to the Imam. So that was the second thing. In the interest of time, I want to move on and just mention the third and final thing that is an example of the political activities of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Now, this third one is something that, remember I was telling you that we can't expect to see details, explicit details of such a thing in the ahadith. But we can gather enough pieces of evidence, enough hints that tell us that definitely the Imams were running an organized and undercover network of Shi'ah. This was the case from before the time of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and it was also the case after the life of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. From the time of Imam al-Hassan and Imam al-Hussein, we see this kind of undercover organized network. We have a story of the governor of Muawiyah. This is in the time before Karbala, when Imam Hussein was the Imam, after the death of Imam al-Hassan, but before the tragedy of Karbala. The governor of Kufa, the governor of Medina, he writes a letter to Muawiyah saying that we have to be very careful of Hussein. I've got reports and I've done research myself that people are frequenting his house and he's planning an uprising. He's planning something against us. Or I wanted to bring a quote for you from the book of Tariq al-Tabari, where after the tragedy of Karbala, Tabari is saying that the Shia were like constantly gathering arms and they were calling people to come and support them and begin an uprising against the Banu Umayyah. This is Tabari saying this about after the tragedy of Karbala. Again, in the time of later Imams like Imam al-Askari, we have very interesting stories about how he would be smuggling letters. He had representatives in different parts of the Muslim world that he would write letters to. And at times he would even smuggle letters. There's one story where he gives a log, what apparently looks like a wooden log, to some man and tells him, go take it to one of my companions. And then on the way, the man, he hits the log against something and the log breaks. And out of that log, letters come out. Imagine, the Imam was smuggling letters. He had gone through that difficulty to take a log and carve it and make it hollow and put letters, secret letters inside. What kind of secrets were there that they were being conveyed that the Imam had to go through so much difficulty to try to smuggle these letters? So we can see this kind of network that existed before Imam Sadiq and after Imam Sadiq. And definitely it was also there during the time of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. I was going to give you some stories about one of the companions of Imam Sadiq called Mu'alla bin Khunais. He's one of the eminent close companions of Imam Sadiq. It seems that he was somebody, or definitely it was the case, that he was somebody who was involved in running such a kind of secret network for the Imam. You see, some of our ulama who have worked a lot in ahadith and who have gathered ahadith into different books, they even have terms for some of the close companions of the Imams. They say that this companion was the bab of the Imam. He was the doorway to the Imam. This companion, another scholar might say that another companion of another Imam, he was the wakil of the Imam. He was the representative of the Imam. Or another very interesting term is that some of the companions are known as sahib as-sir. They are the people who had the secrets of the Imam. Again, these are questions to ponder upon. What kind of secrets are we talking about? We have many ahadith, such as one hadith which is addressing this eminent companion Mu'alla bin Khunais. It's a hadith from the 6th Imam, where he tells Mu'alla not to disclose the secrets of the Ahlul Bayt. Let me just read this hadith to you. He says, yeah, the Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says to Mu'alla, Ya Mu'alla, uktum amrana, wa la tudhi'hu, فإنه من كتم أمرنا ولم يذعه أعزه الله به في الدنيا. He goes on to praise such a person. He says that, oh Mu'alla, hide our amr. Remember I told you our amr refers to what? It's a political thing. It refers to the government of the Ahlul Bayt. He says that Imam is telling Mu'alla that, oh Mu'alla, hide this secret of ours. Don't disclose it. Somebody who hides our secret, Allah will give them izzat. Allah will give them honor. The same Mu'alla who is known as the wakil of the Imam, I think that definitely one of these three terms was used by our ulama for Mu'alla. I'm pretty sure wakil was used for Mu'alla. The same Mu'alla who was a very close companion of Imam Sadiq, and Imam Sadiq himself said that he was like in charge of his finances. Apparently there's more than just that, but one of the things was that he was in charge of the finances of the Imam. This same Mu'alla was killed by the Banu al-Abbas. In a very interesting story, the representative of Mansur, the Abbasid Caliph, another one of the Banu al-Abbas, who was the governor of Medina, he kills Mu'alla bin Khunais. And in one of the narrations, Imam Sadiq is so upset, he comes and confronts Dawood. Dawood was that governor who killed Mu'alla, and he rebukes him. He says, why did you do this? And then he says, I'm going to do nifreen of you. I'm going to curse you. I'm going to do dua against you. And this governor laughs. He takes it lightly. He ridicules the Imam. And that same night, the Imam does dua against that governor, and that governor dies that same night in a kind of miracle that occurred. So we see that these are just some, there's another story as well I thought I'd say, but it's not. The idea was this, that even though we might not have explicit mention of such an undercover network, we can see many, many ahadith and many indications in history that show that there was this kind of a network where the Imam had representatives. We have stories of like khums money being smuggled to the Imam. We have stories of letters being smuggled to and from the Imam. The Imam had this kind of an undercover network that was furthering the social, political goals of the Imam and of the Shi'ah. So inshallah, those were some examples that I wanted to show you, dear brothers and sisters, that we shouldn't have this misconception that Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam was simply a teacher and he had nothing to do with politics. He, we have this idea sometimes, and even some people unfortunately might even say this, that when the Imams couldn't overthrow, they couldn't become the leader, that's it. They just gave up on that goal altogether. And they allowed these oppressive leaders to carry out their oppression. If that was the case, God forbid, then we would have to say that people like Zayd ibn Ali, people like Yahya bin Zayd, these Imam Zadehs who rose up and fought, we would have to say that they were more concerned for the Muslim Ummah than the Imam was. God forbid. Of course that wasn't the case. These same people like Zayd bin Ali and Yahya bin Zayd, they saw the Imam to be their leader, and they were rising up and fighting against oppression in their time. So definitely the Imam, his ideology was that he was not happy with the oppression, and he was trying to do whatever he could according to the circumstances of that time to rise up against oppression and to confront these oppressive leaders. Okay, so my final points that I wanted to conclude with was that, okay, so how does this affect us? Let's say that we've accepted and we've understood that the Imams were we no longer have this misconception that the Imams were quietists. They were people who just sat by and allowed oppression. No, we've understood that the Imams were very much activists. They were spreading a dangerous ideology that was dangerous to the oppressive leaders. They wanted to establish a community based on justice and based on true Islamic values. So how does that affect us now in our daily life? I have some thoughts here that I wanted to share with that how it can affect us, and inshallah we can end with that. One aspect is that we should ourselves understand that this is a very beautiful and important dimension to Islam. Islam is not just about our own individual actions and our worship and our akhlaq. No, part of Islam is also that we have to be concerned for society as at large. When we see economic problems, we see moral problems, we see even spiritual problems in society, when we see that the law of Allah is being trampled upon, we shouldn't be happy with that. We should in our heart wish that we lived in an Islamic environment. There's a beautiful narration, this famous story of the day of Arba'een, when Jabir, the companion of the Prophet ﷺ, after the death of Imam Hussein, when he went to Karbala, in that famous story that we always hear from the Mimbar on the day of Arba'een, Jabir, he says that I heard Sami'tu Habibi Rasulullah, I heard my beloved Rasulullah ﷺ say, Man ahabba qawman hushira ma'ahum, wa man ahabba amala qawmin ushrika fi amalihim. He says that the Prophet said, whoever loves a community, he will be raised with that community. Whoever loves the action of a community, he will be sharik with them. He will be participating. He will be made to be participating with them. So even in our own heart, in our own outlook, we should keep this in mind. We should be vigilant of our heart that, God forbid, because we live in a non-Muslim environment, we are somehow happy with that status quo. No, we shouldn't be happy with it. We should realize that in our heart we aspire and long and love to be in a truly Islamic environment, one where justice and tawheed and Islamic justice is prevalent. And then also we should also realize that not only are we not indifferent to it, but Islam has the solution to all of these problems. This is a separate discussion that needs to be had about how concepts such as tawheed and wilayat and nubuwat, they are very much social concepts that a lot of the ills of society would be erased, would be removed if people were living in an Islamic society and people were being trained according to Islam. If the tide of a society was moving in the way that an Islamic leader was moving it towards, this would prevent a lot of problems in society. It's a separate discussion that needs a lengthy explanation, but something we should think about and inshallah work towards understanding and believing in ourselves. That what is our ideal image of a society? It should be a society based on the rule of Allah, based on the word of Allah. And the last thing that I've gone past my time to really open this up, so I just mentioned it here, that the last thing to think about is that in the time of the ghaiba of our 12th Imam, what does this mean? This kind of belief that we have of Islam running a society, what does it practically mean? Does it mean that we just give up on it altogether because our Imam is not there? Or no, is there something practical that we can still do even though our Imam is in the ghaiba? So these are just some takeaway points for you, dear to think about. With that, inshallah, I will bring this to an end. Sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I thank you very much for listening. I was wishing there would be a bit of participation, so please do feel free to ask. I can stick around if you have any questions or comments. I'm all ears. If you don't accept what I said, even no problem, feel free to attack it, and I'm happy to hear. But I hope it was beneficial. I hope you enjoyed it, inshallah. And again, I thank you for listening. No problem, my pleasure. Okay, I'll wait a minute. If nobody has any questions, then I'll just head out. Thank you so much. Take care. Khuda Hafiz.